All right. So thank you for joining us today. For everyone who's joining us, so we have here Ramin, and I will try to say your last name as Esragi Yazdi.
Yeah, Eshraghi-Yazdi.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us. So Ramin is the filmmaker, director for the film Variety. So Ramin, can you tell us a bit about the film and what inspired you to explore this topic?
Sure. I don't need to get too far into what the film's about because most of the people tuning in will have already probably seen it. Um, but just the tagline is basically variety is about variety in consumer products and how variety in consumer products affects the consumer and the world around us. So it was a topic that interested me because it was a topic that frustrated me. Um, I sensed it. So I make a lot of my personal projects are about ideas and concepts that are in our face, but rarely thought about or rarely discussed. Um, so my previous documentary was called Name, and Variety is the second in kind of a series that I want to do where I take one idea and I see how it applies to me. I um, dissect it and put it back together, see how it's affected my life, and then through that, how it may have affected the world around me, um, and whether it's been positive or negative, and what can be done to curb it if it's negative. So variety was something that, and I have to apologize, I forgot to do this right off the bat. I'm just getting over a little cold, so I'm a little congested. My toddler brought home a little daycare virus, so I apologize for the sound of my voice. So I noticed that there was just way too much variety in any particular thing. And in the film, if you watched it, I talked about trying to replace my toilet, which I thought was kind of a funny way to introduce the idea. But truthfully, it was everything. Like initially, the idea came to me because of almost everything, and when I started researching it, this thing really hit hard. How 50 years ago, maybe even less, if you wanted a pair of glasses, you would walk down to your local store in the village you lived in, or the small city, or even the big city, and you would have a selection of maybe three glasses to choose from, or three whatever pens to choose from. And that's primarily why everyone kind of like in the 50s kind of looked the same because there was variety, but not as much as we see today. And that's why it's funny when you walk into a party or walk into like a classroom and you see someone who has the same shirt as you, it's an event. Like it's like, whoa, we're wearing the same shirt. And we don't even acknowledge like how crazy that idea is and why it's a big deal in our brains. Um, and it has a lot to do with the fact that the odds are so stacked against having, the same shirt in a classroom or a party. But back in the day, that wasn't the case. Everyone kind of had the same TV and they all had the same radio and because there wasn't that many to choose from. So my question was, how does this affect me now living in a world where variety is endless? And then how does it affect the world? So we can talk about that a little bit if you want. But that's generally how I came to the idea of investigating variety. And I knew where it was going to take me. I knew that it was going to take me to the fundamental issue of our world today, waste and plastic and pollution and the environment, et cetera, et cetera. But I wanted to look at it from the lens of something that we don't talk about, variety. So these issues, I kind of want to take a step to the left and look at them from an angle and see how they look. In a way that maybe people don't talk about that particular subject.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As you've mentioned, the negative impact of variety and consumerism on the environment and the plastic and the use of plastic. So there's has been very many documentary and discussions around this. However, I found another point from your film really interesting and very unique that no one really talks about. And that is the impact of variety and consumerism on our mentality and relationships. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, for sure. I'm really glad you honed in on that, because that was the most important part of the film, I think, for me. Primarily because it's not the biggest issue. The biggest issue is what you just said, the plastic waste and the environment, et cetera, et cetera. But there are so many films, and there is right now kind of a call to arms that everyone is awakening. So there's a lot of content out there, and and like I said, this film is about variety. So I didn't want to derail that to completely focus on the issue of plastic waste. Um, that was one of the elements of the negative effects of variety. But yes, you're right. The effect of variety on consumers, on us, on individuals, that was like very interesting to me. I kind of felt it, right? Everyone does. And all this information in this film isn't new. It isn't groundbreaking. It isn't like, oh my God, you sense it, you feel it. Everyone who's walked into a store and had to buy one thing and spent 2 hours debating between colors and brands and et cetera, has left unsatisfied. And that's why consumerism in general is something that can never satisfy the human need for connection and deeper meaning, et cetera, et cetera. They never fill that void. And that's another film. But beyond that, it's actually harmful in that it leaves us not just less satisfied, but more confused, less happy. So it actually has a detrimental effect to our mental health. And one of the academics I spoke to said it best, where there's diminishing returns, right? Like if you had three things to pick from, you would choose one and you would go home and you would enjoy it. But you multiply that to 20 things to pick from, and then you make your decision, you go home, and you have less utility. There's less enjoyment because of the psychological effect that having to make that choice and the minutiae of the differences between these products really hinders us. And unfortunately, this has been used historically in marketing, right? So if you confuse the consumer enough, they'll make a bad choice. And there are products out there that there's no way around it. Um, you know, Even one unit of it is a bad choice, and the only way to sell it is to just overwhelm the consumer, so that they're just exhausted and they give up and they just buy it. So that was a really interesting um, outcome of the film, where I got to hear someone articulate the frustration of that psychological effect to me, that we've all felt, that I felt many times, but to hear it put in a sentence and then maybe animated around it, like it really cements it. So next time, I'm hoping that people, next time they go into a store and they're faced with these obstacles, they have a bit of understanding as to what is happening. And that's one of the most important things about the human condition is understanding what's happening helps you deal with it. And oftentimes, keeping consumers unaware of the effects of consumerism just keeps it going, right? Because consumers don't know how to deal with it. But if you're aware of what's going on psychologically, you can then maybe take a step back. And that's one of the reasons I also wanted to end the film with some suggestions. Now, if you don't mind, I want to talk a little bit about the environmental stuff, because it's very important. but and it's only mentioned maybe once in this film, and again because the film's about variety and not plastic waste necessarily. Um, this film is about individual action. But the truth of the matter is, and what we're learning, what we know about the environment right now, is that individual action was the thing that was sold to us many, many years ago about how the world environmental problems will be solved. People can take individual action, and it'll help. The truth is, it won't. The truth is, major action needs to be taken by the private sector, by companies, and by governments. That being said, I do believe that every individual has the responsibility to live better, and that's why I make these suggestions at the end of my film. Because again, it was me trying to deal with a particular guilt and a particular strain that I felt in life, and how to deal with it better. I know 100% that me shopping at a zero waste grocery store is not going to solve the problem. Um, Maybe even thousands of people shopping at a zero waste grocery store may not solve the problem, but it does make me feel better. Um, Throwing away less plastic in my recycling bin every week does help me anyway. But the truth is that that idea of we have the power because we spend the money is um, is the wrong approach. And also, it's a very free capitalist approach that leaves huge sectors of the population out of the equation, right? Because it requires you to have that money. It requires you to have that $5 to go and spend it at a zero waste grocery store. But if you don't have a zero waste grocery store in your neighborhood because your neighborhood is slow to develop, or you don't have the $5, you have $2 because of potentially your circumstances, then your vote is taken away. And that idea that a dollar is a vote is ludicrous. Is ludicrous. Because not everyone has the same amount of dollars. So what we're saying there is a millionaire has $1 million, and the person working a minimum wage job has $15 votes an hour. Like it just doesn't work. So and that's also one of the reasons where I didn't want to tackle the whole plastic waste stuff um, from that perspective, because um, I didn't want to be too preachy. I wanted to investigate something weird, and variety was weird to me.
Mm. So, I mean, I guess this is more of a philosophical question, and I don't know if we will have a concrete answer. But you kind of talked about the bad parts of having all this variety and the consequences. But you also talk about the good consequences of having variety. And as people, we like variety, we like choice, right? It's that's how we move out of the 50s into the today's world. So I guess from more of a conceptual perspective, how do we find that balance between variety and not having any variety and having too much variety?
No, that's a great question. That's a brilliant question, and that is the trick. And unfortunately, I'm probably not the person to answer it, because I think it requires probably a more significant mind than mine. Um, but for me personally, it came down to mindfulness, right? And like you said, variety, and like we highlighted in the film, variety is an important part of human nature. Um, we crave variety. We crave variety in the foods we eat. We crave. Imagine, that idea of like, if you're on an island, what food would you take with you? And that was the only thing you could eat. That would be a very hard life after a couple of weeks. So we need variety. And that's why I really loved Andrew Fung's contribution to the film. He's a friend of mine, and I knew about his shoe collection because we know each other well. And I always liked his shoe collection because of his passion behind it. Um, I'm more on the side of like, like I would probably never have a shoe collection of that size. But I was drawn to his interest in it because he truly is passionate about it. And he deals with it in a mindful fashion. Now, this is up for debate. You could think his consumption of shoes is wasteful. You can think it's awesome. That's not for me to judge, and that's not for anyone to judge, really. But I didn't find it as gross as the consumption of general things, primarily because of the amount of thought and consideration he puts into it, and what it all means to him. So, yeah, at the end of it all, for me, it was the idea of mindfulness and to be aware and to consume when you're constantly asking yourself questions. Do I need this? Should I buy this? What will this do for me? How long will this last? Who is benefiting from me purchasing this? Like I've seen Andrew not buy shoes. Like I've seen him like be like, no, I don't need this shit, and not buy a shoe. And I think it comes down to that. So everyone has to kind of be comfortable with their limit of consuming. But regardless of that, if you're always asking yourself some questions like that, then you're one step closer to the idea of consuming in a more healthy manner.
So I also wanted to ask about the recent changes with the pandemic, with the move to online shopping, which existed before but is now much, much more common. Do you think that has any positive effect or negative effect on consumerism? Because now, we don't go into a store and look at this walls and walls of products. We just kind of Google it and it comes up.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, its effects are definitely, it's amplified all of the effects that we've talked about in the film. It does have really good aspects to it. I mean, there are some people who require delivery services for groceries and for products, hygiene products, like they need it delivered to their house because they have mobility issues or they have other scenarios or conditions wherein they need extra assistance like that. So yeah, of course, there's a benefit to it. And a lot of people would say, well, I'm driving to the mall to find that shirt. So I'm ordering it online and they're driving it to me. So it kind of balances out. Blah, blah, blah. So there's a lot of like arguments. People kind of try to justify it for themselves. The problem with online consuming is that at least when you had to make an effort to go out and find something, you had time and the ability to ask those questions, to be a little bit more mindful about it. There was also other things like you engaged the world, right? You opened the door and walked into a place and someone greeted you and you greeted them and you made a connection. It may be totally superficial or maybe really deep. I mean, I've had lovely encounters with shopkeepers who've told me things or who are super engaging and really love what they do. And, so all of that is kind of taken away from the experience. Also, the problem in my mind isn't it is the ability to buy anything at any time on the internet, but it's the idea of being able to return anything at any time. That to me is a recipe for disaster. That takes away at least when you went to the mall and you bought something, you kind of have to be sure about it because when you went home, you didn't want to drive all the way back to the mall, right? But with some services now, you're like, oh, whatever. If it doesn't fit, I'm just going to send it back. I just have to print out a piece of paper, tape it to the package, and just drop it off in a mailbox. And the amount of waste connected to that, the amount of transport going back, there's some people who will purchase 10 things knowing that they're only going to keep one of those things. So they purchase 10 things, it comes to them, then they try it on in their house, and in return, the 9 that didn't fit well. Well, the consequence of that has now doubled the footprint of that particular product because it's added 9 more card tricks and 9 more packaging scenarios and 9 more blah, 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 blah. So again, I don't think the evil is in online shopping necessarily, but to be mindful of it. I support my local stores both physically and online. Like I order from local stores periodically, especially during the pandemic. It makes a lot of sense. But yeah, it's just I guess it comes down to like whenever you're making a purchase of any kind, just really think about it. Think about its effect, its footprint, its weight on the world, its weight on you psychologically. Um, yeah, yeah. It's funny because when the pandemic happened, right before the pandemic happened, I just got into the groove of the zero waste stores that I had found and had implemented in my life. And I saw my recycling reduced to almost nothing. And I was like, wow, this is great. I feel great about it. Pandemic hit, ballooned again, right? Because there was nothing out there, and I had to, provide for my family, so I had to consume the way I was consuming before I learned all of this stuff. So sometimes there's scenarios where you just can't, like one of the people in the film say, um, it's almost impossible. It's almost impossible to shop without purchasing plastics, and that's the problem. And that's why it's not on the individual. It really has to be on the government.
Mm-hmm. And from the consumer perspective, I guess we can end with this question. Is again more of a philosophical question. So if we're looking at the timeline of the development of plastic and all this variety, we're kind of entering a second, third generation of people who grew up with this variety.
Mm-hmm.
Like we've never seen what it was like to go to a store and not being able to choose amongst 10, 20 shirts,
Mm-hmm.
right? So do you think there's any hope for us? Because can we see an alternative that we've never seen before?
100%, 100%. I think there's actually even a backlash to it. I think, luckily, some elements of human nature and some elements of sociology in regards to like kind of fighting back against your parents' generation of doing things or living might help us in this scenario. I've noticed that younger people, they tend to buy less already. They want to own less, and that's like the whole share economy and the whole the Ubers and the electric scooters and the Airbnbs. Like that's kind of a testament to all of this stuff. A little bit problems with those as well, but different film. But yeah, so in another way, actually, like tertiary markets, like third tier markets, that were a big deal, like in the '90s, are coming back, like thrift stores. Like I've noticed an explosion of thrift stores and young people who are purchasing their clothing not new but secondhand used, right? So reusing, repurposing. Upgrading, like those ideas, those are all happening within the younger generation. So yeah, I'm very hopeful. I'm absolutely hopeful. I mean, there's really no choice. And I think once people start living more mindfully and with less things in general, the benefits of it are immediate, right? Like you just feel better. It's like cleaning your room. When you tidy up your room, you immediately feel good. And that happens on a bigger scale in your life. When you clean out the need for things, and and I'm not saying to anyone not to purchase things or not to want things. That's not the question. Just want the right things. Hold yourself back maybe a couple of months, save up a little bit more money, and buy the thing that's going to last a lifetime, as opposed to the thing that's going to fall apart in a year and you'll have to replace. Like, be strategic about it. And there's no other way right now. There's no other. No one's going to come save us. Everybody has to contribute at this point. And that idea of like it not being the onus not being on the individual, in a bigger way, it It is because individuals sit in the boards of these huge companies, and individuals are the CEOs and presidents of these companies. So once culture shifts, right, and people start behaving differently, it'll eventually affect them, and maybe they'll start behaving differently, and maybe their decisions will then change in those boardrooms and in those places. Politicians, right? I mean, these are individuals, right? So, so it kind of isn't on the individual, but it is, yeah.
Oh, it's there's certainly a lot we can do, but it's not easy. Takes a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for spending your evening with us and sharing your insights. Thank you, Ramin. And do you have any closing thoughts for the audience?
Thanks for watching the film. It's a humble little piece supported by the Alberta Foundation for the Arts and a lot of great minds who took the time to talk to me about it. And I really appreciate that you guys took an hour to watch it and to think about it. Thank you. Right. And thank you guys for programming.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you for joining us, everyone.